Ma's teaching. The outsider is not satisfied until he can classify a great sage in some category. That one is or had been a bhakta, this one is a jnani, that other is a karma yogi, and all such things, they say. But the sage who has attained the summit rests on a terrain where all the parts fuse together. And if he takes the support of a particular way for guiding his followers, it will, by preference, not compulsion, be the one which he has already traversed for attaining the goal. But Ma Anandamayi, as she often declared herself, and strange as it may seem to us, had never been in the state of ignorance, and the state of perfection had always been her natural state. To try and classify her in any category would thus be a futile exercise. Her teaching was directed towards an extreme variety of individuals. In her entourage, there were spiritual aspirants who practiced self-inquiry, the Vichara Marga path of knowledge. There were bhaktas and shaktas, karma yogis, people who lived in the world and practiced a spiritual discipline, and spiritually advanced sadhus, as well as people learning the ABCs of the basics of the spiritual path. There were Hindus and some Jains, Christians and Jews, Europeans and Americans, as well as Indians. She was, before everything else, the mother, and she did not limit her teaching to some individuals, but wanted to save as great a number of people as possible. Her teaching was also adapted to the level of evolution of each individual. The spiritual aspirant who has reached maturity, the sadhu, she advised the path of Advaita, whereas to simple people, the adoration of an image, or japa yoga, mantra recitation. In her verbal teaching, however, she strictly adhered to the ideas of ancient Hindu tradition, the Sanatana Dharma, and always returned to the central concept of Advaita. The Sanatana Dharma is the eternal religion, and she often said, to know Bhagavan, the Lord or God, is to know oneself, and to know oneself is to know God. Ma's originality lay not in the teaching itself, but in the fresh, lively, and spontaneous manner in which she put forth the ideas. Because what was she saying, even though it was in perfect accordance with the scriptures, it was not taken from books, but was direct expression of the truth. She used simple language with no high-sounding words. She did not give a speech, but answered questions with individuals which they had put to her. The conversation was always lively. One never felt the boredom that is so often associated with philosophical discussions. From time to time, an amusing story awakened the interest of those who were not capable of reaching the level of philosophical discussion, and a touch of humor or a burst of laughter reminded us of what she was talking about, the joyful knowledge. Her methods. Esoteric teaching cannot either be enclosed in words or codified in formulas, because it is alive and varies according to individuals and circumstance. Besides, the verbal teaching of a sage is far from being the essential element in his role as a guide and guru. But with Sri Ma, was she really a guru? She did not give official initiation, that is, the transmission of a mantra accompanied by ritual. Then again, if one goes according to traditional rituals, no one except her husband can pretend to be her disciple. When this kind of initiation was necessary or was demanded, she either entrusted it to her mother, Didima, who had taken the vows of sannyas, or sent the aspirant to another guru. And in the last years of her life, the initiation was given by the brahmacharis of the ashram in the presence of Ma. In fact, for playing the role of guru, some traces of ego have to persist, and the ego is totally absent in Shri Ma. However, a large number of individuals receive regular instruction from her concerning their spiritual practices. Even if she didn't give official diksha or initiation, she transmitted spiritual power, and that is the true initiation. The people whom she guided were directed towards the flowering of their own spiritual inclinations, not those imposed upon them. One cannot say that Ma had any particular methods or techniques of her own. However, she did not or did use one technique, if we can use that term, which characterized her and especially marked her teaching. From the first contact with Ma Anandamayi, one could not but be struck by her extraordinary power to draw people, recognize the dominant affective note in someone who approached her, and entering into the game, become the person who could fill the void in that person's life and heart. To some, she appeared as a mother, as a friend to others, and to others yet again as a child. As she has said, "I am your granddaughter." She would say this often to elderly people who came to see her. She thus forged a bond of love with those who came to seek refuge at her feet. This bond is often very powerful, and all mundane attractions pale before it and wither away one by one. Because this pure and luminous love gives a joy which no pleasure of the world can equal. Ma directed this love towards the divine because it came from the divine. As she said about everyday life, intense activity, and at the center of this activity, an eternal calm. This is how one could define Shri Ma's attitude in daily life. The organization which bears her name and which she directed comprises about 30 ashrams, as well as the constructions put up for Ma's use in private houses. She rarely stayed at one place for more than a month. She traveled ceaselessly, as did Buddha and Shankaracharya in ancient times, taking her kind words and radiant love to those who needed them. Everywhere she went, there were immense crowds surging around to get her darshan. To her, they were not anonymous crowds, because she knew how to recognize the divine in each individual. No one was unimportant for her, and each one who approached her received as much of this divine mana as he was capable of absorbing. When she traveled, which was very often, she was accompanied by a large number of sadhus and brahmacharis. There was the hustle and bustle of the railway stations. There were the crowds of distracted and enervated people pressing forward before her compartment at almost every station. There was the tiredness of nights spent in the train. But through it all, she always had that infinitely restful smile and the great eternal calm. Her days were so charged with activity that one wondered how a human being, but she was no human being, no matter how ingenious, could sustain it without flinching. One day she presided over the inauguration of a temple or of a great religious festival, the Durga Puja or the Shivaratri. Another time she was invited by a Mahatma and agreed to a tight, overtaxing schedule. Yet another time it was the Bhagavad Sapta, or the annual Samyam Sapta, if not the tiring ceremonies on the occasion of her birthday, and many, many other things. But never did one see her lose her sang-froid for even a second, nor get distracted. She was always infinitely kind and gentle, and had that great eternal calm. Ma often stayed for a fortnight or more in one of her ashrams, whether at Benares or Vrindavan, Dehradun or Calcutta. Some of them were imposing structures with several houses. Only sannyasis and brahmacharis lived there, because absolute chastity was a condition for being admitted in these ashrams. But do you think Ma rested here when she visited? Even when she did, which was rarely, it was only rest in relative terms, because there was always the enormous correspondence to be taken care of, the problems of the ashrams, the darshan for the visitors. That a person can withstand with no apparent fatigue such intense activity is astonishing. But what is even more astounding is the fact that not only did she concern herself with the minutest details of everyone, but whatever she did bore the mark of perfection, whether it was the details of a puja or the instructions for the construction of an ashram or temple, or just a delicious dish she had prepared herself. She never forgot anyone, even in the crowd of thousands of people. She was very particular about her appointments. A visitor who came to see her was received and bid farewell to at an exact moment. A private interview was granted at a convenient time. Ma seemed to completely identify herself with each circumstance and live intensely in the present moment. Each individual who had requested her darshan or attention received her complete care, and he alone existed at that particular moment. If someone had any problems, she was entirely at his service to solve those problems. Thus, Ma showed us that in daily life, one could engage oneself perfectly in activity while always resting within the Supreme. Ma has left her physical body, but her presence is always there within us. Those who have been touched by her grace will never be able to forget her.